She walks into the room, soft eyes, a gentle smile, radiating kindness. Everything about her says harmless. But Carl Jung, the man who explored the darkest corners of the human psyche, saw something else. He believed that behind certain types of feminine charm, there hides a silent force, a force that does not scream. It seduces. It does not attack. It waits. And when the time is right, it strikes, not with fists or fire, but with manipulation, control, and something even more dangerous: invisibility. Jung called it the shadow, the part of our psyche we pretend does not exist. But in women, he believed, this shadow could wear the most disarming mask of all: innocence. And when innocence becomes a disguise, it becomes a weapon. This was not a theory he shouted from rooftops. Jung wrote about it in private notes, quiet lectures, cryptic language. Because he knew what he saw was not acceptable. Society would reject it. Academia would bury it. And the world was not ready. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The women Jung feared most were not loud, aggressive, or obviously cruel. They were kind, polished, perfectly composed. And yet behind the facade, they held the power to destroy reputations, psyches, even lives, without ever raising their voice. Is it possible that the most dangerous kind of woman is the one no one suspects? Jung thought so. And if what he wrote is true, then almost everything we think we know about female nature is a lie. In this video, we will dive deep into Carl Jung's most unsettling ideas about women, not the sanitized versions, the hidden truths, the notes he left behind for those brave enough to read between the lines. Because once you see what he saw, you can never unsee it. Why is it that some people seem to hold incredible power, not through force, not through wealth, but simply by the way they present themselves? In particular, why does innocence, softness, or vulnerability often hide a kind of invisible control? What if this is not accidental? What if it's archetypal, deeply embedded in the human psyche? Carl Jung, one of the most influential minds in psychology, believed that what we see on the surface is rarely the full picture, especially when it comes to human nature, and even more so, the feminine psyche. Jung warned that appearances can be deceiving. What looks harmless may contain hidden power. What appears pure might be the most dangerous thing of all. In a world obsessed with transparency and political correctness, some of Jung's most piercing insights have been buried, ignored, softened, or locked away in his private notes. But today, we're going to open that box. We are going to explore what Jung really believed about the deeper layers of female nature. Not just the anima or the shadow, but the dangerous psychological games that unfold beneath the surface of charm, passivity, and attraction. This is not about blaming or demonizing, it's about waking up. Jung believed the unconscious rules our lives unless we learn to see it. And the female psyche, just like the male, has a dark side, one that society often romanticizes or refuses to see. Innocence can be a mask, empathy can be a weapon, and behind the sweetest smile might lie a predator, not out of malice, but out of instinct. In this video, you will see how Jung decoded this paradox, how he unmasked the archetype of the innocent predator. You will discover the psychology behind female influence, the hidden power of projection, and why men often become victims of their own illusions. But more importantly, you will come away with the ability to see beneath the surface, to decode the unspoken rules of attraction, manipulation, and unconscious control. Carl Jung did not want to start a war between genders. He wanted people to individuate, to become aware of the shadow they are dancing with. And that awareness begins right here. In almost every culture, across centuries, the ideal woman has been painted with the same brush: soft, gentle, caring, the embodiment of innocence. She is praised not for her dominance, but for her passivity, not for what she does, but for what she appears to be. This image of the innocent, harmless woman is not just a social role. According to Carl Jung, it's a mask, a carefully constructed persona shaped by society, but eventually adopted so deeply that it becomes indistinguishable from the self. Jung believed that the persona is the identity we wear to function in society, a psychological mask we present to be accepted. But while men are often taught to wear masks of strength, confidence, or stoicism, women are conditioned toward a different disguise: innocence. This is not just about appearing good. It's about appearing non-threatening, agreeable, even naive. But here's the danger. The more a mask is rewarded, the more it becomes strategic. Society has always rewarded women who appear pure, vulnerable, and dependent. But Jung observed something deeper, a subconscious use of these traits not just to fit in, but to influence. The more harmless someone appears, the more others lower their guard. And that is where the real power begins. This is not about deceit. It's about adaptation. In environments where open dominance is punished, subtle control becomes survival. Jung saw how women, often excluded from direct power in patriarchal societies, developed a different kind of influence, one rooted in charm, emotional sensitivity, and the ability to shape others' perceptions without appearing to do so. The power was not in what they said, but in what they provoked, in how others responded to their image. Think of the iconic femme fatale, not as a movie trope, but as a psychological reality. She never threatens, she never commands. She simply exists in a way that pulls others in, disarms them, and makes them act on her behalf. Her innocence is not always real, it's often weaponized, and even when it is not conscious, it works. This duality fascinated Jung. He saw that within the innocent persona, there often existed a dormant shadow, a darker side that could emerge when necessary. The shift is almost imperceptible. A smile becomes a tool, tears become strategy, silence becomes dominance, and the line between authentic vulnerability and manipulative behavior gets blurred. In real life, we have all seen this in action. A soft-spoken woman subtly redirecting a conversation to her advantage, a seemingly helpless persona that inspires fierce loyalty or protection, a gentle tone masking fierce psychological control. These are not anomalies. They are socially encoded behaviors passed down through generations, often unconsciously. Jung's insight was that innocence is not always innocent. It can be a projection, one that invites others to project their own fantasies onto the woman wearing the mask. Men project purity, beauty, safety. And in doing so, they become blind to the deeper layers beneath. The woman, in turn, may not even realize she's using this power. Because it's not always deliberate, it's archetypal. It's part of the collective unconscious. But when a person starts to believe their own mask, when a woman begins to identify entirely with the innocent role, a disconnect begins. Her true self, with all its complexity, emotions, desires, and power, gets buried under the need to appear harmless. That's where the danger grows. Because what's repressed always returns. And when the shadow erupts, it doesn't ask for permission. This is the psychological battlefield Jung wanted us to understand. The persona is not evil, it's necessary. But when it becomes too dominant, it distorts reality, both for the person wearing it and for those interacting with it. In the next section, we'll go deeper. We'll look at Jung's theory of the anima, the symbolic feminine within every psyche, and how this inner image shapes not just women, but men's perception of women, often to their own destruction. To understand the mysterious power of the feminine, not just in women, but in the psyche of every man, Jung introduced one of his most profound ideas, the anima. In Jungian psychology, the anima is the unconscious feminine side of a man's mind. She's not a person, but an inner image, a symbolic representation formed through collective experiences, stories, culture, and, most dangerously, personal projection. This inner figure influences how men feel, how they love, and how they suffer. And often, they don't even realize it. For Jung, the anima was not just some abstract force. She had power, raw, emotional, irrational, seductive power. When a man encounters a woman who aligns, even slightly, with his unconscious image of the ideal feminine, his anima awakens. But this does not lead to clarity. It leads to illusion. This is what Jung called the projection trap. A man projects his inner anima onto a real woman, not seeing her for who she is, but as a reflection of his own psychic fantasy. He sees purity where there is complexity. He sees grace where there may be calculation. He falls in love, not with her, but with the ideal he's placed upon her. And in doing so, he becomes vulnerable. Jung believed this dynamic was not rare, it was universal. The anima is not just a poetic metaphor, It's a psychic mechanism that pulls men into relationships, emotions, and decisions they don't fully understand. It bypasses logic. It overrides red flags. It creates a trance-like state where the woman becomes larger than life, almost divine. But here's the twist. Real women, Jung argued, often interact with this projection, consciously or unconsciously. Some feel suffocated by it, pressured to live up to a fantasy they never created. Others, however, learn to navigate it and wield it. When a woman realizes she is being idealized, she has a choice. She can reject it, break the illusion, and reveal her real self, flawed, human, authentic. Or she can play into it and extract power from the projection. This is not manipulation in the Hollywood sense. It's subtler, more psychological. It's when a woman learns that a certain tone, a certain vulnerability, or a certain mystique activates something in men. And once activated, that man begins to serve the fantasy, not the reality. This is how Jung saw women interacting with the male psyche, not just in love, but in society. The female image is often elevated, romanticized, and sanctified in the male unconscious. Think of the muse, the angel, the goddess. These are not just roles, they're projections. And they blind men from seeing the full spectrum of the woman in front of them. But here's where it becomes dangerous. When a man is consumed by his anima projection, he loses his center. He abandons logic. He becomes emotionally possessed. And women, especially those who understand this dynamic, can harness it. Not out of cruelty, but often out of necessity. In a world where direct power is historically denied, psychological influence becomes a weapon. Jung did not blame women for this. He blamed unconsciousness, the refusal to face the inner image and integrate it. The anima is not evil, but when she's unexamined, she controls the man. And when she's empowered by women who know how to mirror her back to him, the line between reality and illusion vanishes. In many relationships, this plays out subtly. The man becomes obsessed, the woman becomes distant. The more he idealizes her, the more detached she becomes. He gives, she withdraws. He chases, she controls. Not out of domination, but because he's not relating to her. He's relating to his own projected inner world. And here lies the brutal truth. Projection empowers manipulation. Not because the woman is inherently manipulative, but because she holds a mirror to a man's fantasy. And if she chooses to, she can become that fantasy, for a while. Long enough to gain devotion, protection, influence. But underneath it all, neither person truly knows the other. They're both lost in an archetypal dance. For Jung, the only way out was individuation, the painful process of reclaiming the projection, seeing the woman as she truly is, and confronting the shadowy depths of one's own psyche. Only then can a man break the spell of the anima and begin to love, not an idea, but a person. This section of Jung's theory, though often overshadowed by his more popular ideas, cuts to the heart of modern relationships. It shows us that the most powerful chains are invisible. They are not placed on us by others. They are projected by us onto others. In the next part, we will go even deeper, into the dark feminine, the shadow behind the charm, and why Jung saw it as both a threat and a vital step towards psychological wholeness. Beneath every polished persona, Jung believed, lies a shadow, a hidden part of the psyche that holds everything we repress, deny, or cannot face. While most people associate this with personal flaws or darkness, Jung's insight went further. He believed that the feminine psyche, like the masculine, contains a shadow, and when left unconscious, it can become dangerous. This is not about demonizing women. It's about understanding the psychological undercurrents that shape human behavior. Just as men wrestle with their inner shadow, aggression, dominance, pride, women too carry a shadow, but it wears a different face, one that can be more elusive, more socially acceptable, and far harder to detect. Jung referred to this as the dark anima when it appears in a man's psyche, and the dark feminine when expressed externally. It is the part of the feminine that seduces not out of love, but out of control, that nurtures, not to heal, but to bind, that appears gentle, but harbors contempt beneath the smile. This shadow does not announce itself. It whispers. It hides in charm, in sweetness, in vulnerability, because that's where its power lies. Society has trained women, over centuries, to avoid direct displays of anger, dominance, or aggression. These traits, when repressed, don't vanish. They go underground, and what goes underground becomes shadow. Jung warned that when these traits are not acknowledged, when a woman cannot admit her own envy, rage, or hunger for control, they emerge in twisted forms, not through violence, but through psychological games, emotional manipulation, passive-aggressive tactics, withholding love, exploiting the projections placed upon her. This is the dark side of charm, when it becomes a tool not for connection, but for control, when attention is granted as currency, when affection is weaponized, when the illusion of innocence becomes a mask for power, plays. We see this dynamic in countless myths and stories. The siren who lures sailors to their death, the femme fatale who destroys with a kiss, the mother who smothers rather than nurtures. These are not just archetypes, they're expressions of the unconscious feminine shadow. And the most unsettling part? Many women are not fully aware of when they are acting from this place, because the shadow is unconscious by nature. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like survival, like instinct, like doing what I have to do. In Jung's private notes, he observed women who seemed outwardly delicate and kind, yet carried an aura of emotional domination. They would subtly undermine others, twist situations, or create psychological dependence, all while maintaining the appearance of care. Jung did not accuse them, he studied them. He saw a pattern, and he believed it stemmed from repressed psychic energy. Modern psychology has caught up to some of this. The term covert narcissism often describes behavior that looks passive but is deeply manipulative. Traits like false modesty, emotional withholding, or victimhood used to gain power mirror Jung's ideas of the feminine shadow. But Jung saw it all decades ago, and he framed it not as pathology, but as an unintegrated part of the psyche. He believed that women, like men, must confront their shadow, to own their rage, their control impulses, their hunger for dominance, not to act on them blindly, but to integrate them consciously. Because when ignored, these traits act from the shadows, distorting relationships and creating cycles of emotional chaos. So, what does this mean in the real world? It means that charm is not always innocent, that behind the soft smile might be a storm of unspoken resentment, that some women learn to control not with fists or threats, but with silence, neediness, or seduction, and that some men fall for it, not because they are weak, but because they are enchanted by the projection. It also means that understanding this dynamic is not about blame, it's about awareness. When we bring the shadow into the light, it loses its grip. A woman who owns her capacity for power no longer needs to hide it behind performance. A man who sees through the anima's illusion can finally relate to a woman as she is, not as he imagines. Jung's warning was not just about women, it was about what happens when any part of the psyche, especially the part society tells us to suppress, are denied expression. They fester, they rot, and they rise, cloaked in charm, pretending to be innocent. The dark feminine is not a myth, it's a psychological reality, one we see echoed in modern culture, social dynamics, and relationship breakdowns. But Jung did not see it as evil, he saw it as unfinished, as something that needed to be seen, felt, owned, and transformed, because only then can the feminine, in all of us, become whole. Jung's ideas were forged in a time when psychology was still in its infancy, but some truths don't age. In fact, as society has evolved, the symptoms he once observed in private consultations now echo across the public landscape. The shadow that once whispered now speaks loudly through media, relationships, and the digital world we all live in. We live in an age obsessed with appearances, carefully curated identities, filtered images, and personas crafted for validation. In Jungian terms, this is the age of the hyper-persona, where who you seem to be has become more important than who you are. And nowhere is this more evident than in the modern female archetypes promoted across pop culture. From influencers to dating apps to reality television, we are surrounded by examples of women who appear kind, soft, or emotionally wounded, yet who operate with precise social control. The pick-me girl, the emotionally unavailable seductress, the chronic victim, all are forms of quiet domination disguised as vulnerability. The feminine shadow, Jung would argue, has simply modernized. In romantic relationships, this takes a sharp form. Emotional manipulation does not always look like yelling or gaslighting. Often, it's the strategic silence, the teary breakdown after being called out, the shifting of blame under the guise of being too sensitive. These are red flags Jung would have recognized instantly, expressions of the unconscious shadow working behind the scenes. And men, especially those unaware of their own projections, often fall for it. Jung warned that a man who has not integrated his own anima will project an idealized version of femininity onto women. He will believe he's found the one, not realizing he's only found a mirror for his unconscious needs. That's why so many modern relationships crash under the weight of unmet expectations. He wanted a muse, she wanted control. He wanted connection, she wanted validation. Both were acting out unconscious scripts, and neither saw the shadow. Social media fuels this chaos. Platforms reward attention-seeking, performative vulnerability, and seductive personas. In Jung's terms, this is the inflated feminine mask, a false self that draws power from likes, comments, and the illusion of connection. But behind that mask often lies emptiness, insecurity, and unacknowledged rage. This is not just about individual psychology, it's cultural. We have created a society that rewards manipulation as long as it's wrapped in charm. We celebrate the woman who gets what she wants through emotional appeal. We ignore the subtle coercion, the weaponized softness, the selective helplessness. We refuse to acknowledge that not all harm looks like abuse. Sometimes it wears perfume and cries on cue. Jung believed that what is not made conscious will be lived out as fate. That's exactly what's happening. Women who never confront their shadow become entangled in relationships that end in confusion, resentment, or emotional destruction, and they don't know why. Men, seduced by projections, become disillusioned and bitter. They feel betrayed, but can't articulate how. And it's not just in relationships. You see it in workplaces, the colleague who plays innocent while sabotaging others. In politics, where optics matter more than truth. In media, where victimhood is power. The shadow feminine isn't a rare phenomenon. It's the unspoken engine behind many social dynamics. But there's hope. Jung's solution was not to suppress or shame the shadow, but to integrate it, to look at it directly, to ask, what am I hiding? What power am I afraid to claim? What emotions am I pretending not to feel? For women, this means owning the parts of themselves that feel too intense, too ambitious, too unfeminine. It means rejecting the lie that power only comes through innocence. It means embracing authentic strength instead of covert manipulation. For men, it means seeing women clearly, not as ideals or villains, but as full human beings. It means integrating their own anima so they're not vulnerable to projection. It means developing discernment instead of worship. Modern culture teaches us to polish the mask. Jung taught us to strip it away. And if his theory has never felt more relevant, it's because the shadow has never been more visible, not in the form of monsters, but in the faces we scroll past every day. Carl Jung was not a man afraid of darkness. He spent his entire career exploring the deepest corners of the human psyche, archetypes, shadows, traumas, and dreams. But even he, one of the most daring thinkers of the 20th century, chose silence when it came to certain truths. Why? The answer lies in the cultural landmines of his time, and in the raw volatility of the ideas themselves. When Jung studied the feminine psyche, he discovered something profoundly unsettling, that beneath the mask of innocence often lies a dangerous force, a manipulative, shadowed power capable of distorting reality itself. But to say this aloud, to publish this as clinical theory, that would have meant war. The early 20th century was not kind to psychological nuance, especially when it came to gender. Women were still fighting for the right to vote, to be seen as equals, to be recognized outside of the domestic sphere. In that climate, any suggestion that female nature might contain a manipulative undercurrent would have been seen as not just controversial, but misogynistic, regressive, even cruel. Jung knew that. He was not just a psychologist, he was a public figure, a man deeply aware of how ideas could be weaponized or misunderstood. Publishing his private observations about female shadow traits would have risked not only his reputation, but also the legitimacy of his larger work. And there was something else. Jung understood the collective psyche. He believed that certain truths could only be revealed when a society was mature enough to digest them without distortion. And this was not one of those times. Imagine unveiling the idea that femininity itself, when repressed or distorted, could lead to covert domination, emotional manipulation, and societal instability, while women were still being silenced on the world stage. It would have been cultural suicide. Even today, this idea remains taboo. In our modern discourse, to critique feminine behavior is often seen as an attack on women themselves. We are allowed to talk about toxic masculinity, male aggression, the shadow of patriarchy, but mention the dark feminine, and the room falls silent. Why? Because the myth of innocence is still protected. The cultural narrative still clings to the idea of woman as nurturer, victim, muse, but never predator, never destroyer. Jung's notes threaten that myth. That's why they stayed private, hidden. He once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what if becoming who you truly are means confronting truths that make the world deeply uncomfortable? Jung made a choice. He whispered these truths in letters, hinted at them in dreams, buried them in symbolism. He chose to protect his broader mission, understanding the human soul, by not igniting a fire the world was not ready to face. But now, decades later, that fire is smoldering again. We live in a time where manipulation hides behind softness, where personas are crafted for influence, where victimhood can be power. Jung's silence is no longer necessary, because today more than ever, we need the courage to look at the forbidden truths, not to shame, not to divide, but to understand. The moment we do, we gain something priceless: clarity. So, what does all of this mean for you? It means that the most dangerous illusions are often the ones that come cloaked in softness, in beauty, in charm. Jung's insights were not a condemnation of women, but a warning to all of us. When we fail to see the full spectrum of human nature, both light and shadow, we become vulnerable to manipulation, projection, and quiet destruction. You don't need to be a psychologist to see this play out in real life. You have probably felt it. The friend who always plays the victim but somehow controls everyone around them. The partner who never raises their voice but makes you feel like the villain. The influencer whose entire persona is designed to seem harmless, but whose words shift minds and behaviors with surgical precision. These are not accidents. These are the shadows Jung was trying to map. But here's the most important part. This video is not about them. It's about you. It's about recognizing when you are being pulled into someone else's narrative. It's about seeing through the mask, not with judgment, but with clarity. Because clarity is power. When you become aware of the anima, of projection, of the shadow behind the smile, you gain something rare in this world: discernment. You stop reacting blindly. You start seeing truth where others see only performance. And that's the path to individuation. The process Jung believed was the true goal of life: to integrate your conscious and unconscious mind, to stop living under illusions, whether your own or someone else's. This is not about fear, it's about freedom. The freedom to trust your instincts, to question appearances, to understand that innocence can be a strategy, not just a state of being. And maybe most powerfully, it's the freedom to look in the mirror and ask, where am I wearing a mask? Where am I projecting what I want to see instead of what's really there? Because when you remove that mask from yourself and from others, what you find is not ugliness, it's reality. And reality, no matter how uncomfortable, is where all growth begins. So remember this: the truth may be hidden, it may be uncomfortable, but it's never your enemy. The enemy is the lie that pretends to protect you while keeping you blind. If this video opened your eyes to something deeper, consider subscribing. We explore the psychology behind the mask, the hidden forces shaping how we think, feel, and live. Drop a comment below. What part of Jung's insight struck you the most? And remember, awareness is the first step to freedom.